Okay. Good morning, everyone. I see people are joining the meeting now. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Debokolo Kubu from the Southern African Liaison Office, and I'd like to welcome you all to this virtual public multi-stakeholder dialogue to update stakeholders on the status of migrant policy changes in South Africa. In particular, the controversial white paper on citizenship, immigration, and refugee protections towards a complete overhaul of the migration system in South Africa, as well as the Immigration Amendment Bill B8 of 2024. Today's session is public, so you'll notice now that the meeting is being recorded and it'll also be live streamed to our Facebook page. And then sometime after the meeting, it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So please feel free to share that in your networks for those who might be interested in our work or what we will be unpacking this morning. As always, if you have any questions about this meeting, please feel free to drop us an email at invitations@salo.org.za. I will post those details in the chat as well as the program. Um, the first hour is for the speakers to give their presentations, and my colleague Fozia, who will be chairing the sessions, will introduce them shortly. Following that, in the second hour, we'll open up discussions to the floor. That is your opportunity then to please raise any concerns, give any contributions that you have based on what the speakers have presented in the first session. Please use the raise hand function if you have any questions or contributions to make, and the chair or myself as the co-host will acknowledge you. And you can also contribute in the chat as well. For those who haven't, if you haven't already, please ensure that your name and surname are displayed correctly on the screen. And please identify yourself when you make your contribution in the second hour. And I think that's it from me. Without wasting too much of your time, I'd like to thank everyone here for joining us and hand over to my colleague Fozia David, who will be chairing this session. Thank you very much, Fozia.
Hi, good morning, Tebogo. Thank you so much, and a warm welcome to everyone on the call, and thank you for making time, especially as we are heading into December. So, on behalf of the Southern African Liaison Office and in partnership with Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, I'd like to warmly welcome you to this virtual dialogue, this multi-stakeholder dialogue on the critical and evolving issue of migrant rights in South Africa. So, as Tebogo indicated, today's dialogue does take place on the backdrop of significant proposed changes to South Africa's migrant policy framework, and we are here to reflect and examine these major developments, namely, as Tebogo indicated, the white paper on citizenship, immigration, and refugee protection, which signals a proposed overhaul of the migration system in South Africa, and as well as the Immigration Amendment Bill, which aims to bring the country's immigration detention practices in line with the Constitutional Court. So these policy shifts has profound implications, but not only for migrants and asylum seekers, but also for the broader principles of human rights, constitutionalism, and social justice in our region. And so we are fortunate enough today to be joined by a distinguished panel of speakers and experts who bring legal, academic, activist, and grassroots perspective to this vital conversation. We have Carol Lemekewa from Lawyers for Human Rights, Mr. Mike Ndlovu representing Kupanang Africa Against Xenophobia, Prof. Joe Very from the African Center for Migration and Society, and Bram Hanekom, a well-respected human rights activist working in the migrant space for more than 2 decades. And so we thank you for all of your participation, your commitment, and the work that you do. And as we begin, I encourage all of us to engage openly, critically, and constructively as we navigate these complex issues. And so I also have the pleasure to introduce Ms. Carol Lemakwana from the Lawyers for Human Rights, Refugee and Migrants' Rights Program. She's an accomplished human rights lawyer and passionate advocate for the rights of refugees and migrants in South Africa. Carol serves as the clinic manager at the Johannesburg Law Clinic under the Refugee and Migrant Rights Program at Lawyers for Human Rights. As an admitted attorney, she brings not only a professional legal expertise, but also a deep commitment to social justice and constitutional values. And so we are honored to have you with us today, Carol, to share some of your insights on the implications of the proposed white paper and Immigration Amendment Bill for migrant rights in South Africa. Over to you, Carol.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible, and apologies to the colleagues. I am attending to another engagement, so I'm not really in my office, so they excuse the noise and let me know or make any action if I'm not audible at all. So thank you very much, everyone. Thanks to SALO for the invitation, and good morning to the to other panelists and everyone on this call. My name is Carol Lemekwana, and I am the lead clinic manager in the Johannesburg Law Clinic under the Refugee and Migrant Rights Program at Lawyers for Human Rights, as already introduced. So just to start us off about Lawyers for Human Rights, this is one of the oldest public interest organizations. We were celebrating our 46th year this year. So for over 25 years, our program, which is the Refugee and Migrant Rights Program, has worked to promote, protect, and advance the rights of asylum seekers and refugees in South Africa. So we currently have 3 walk-in law clinics. We have one in Pretoria, which is our head office. We have one in Johannesburg, that is where I am based, and we have another walk-in law clinic in our Durban office. So in this walk-in law clinics, what we do is to provide direct legal services to over 1,000 clients on each and every year. This is helping them with navigating the asylum and refugee protection system that is increasingly dysfunctional and is in crisis. So we also support clients to access the essential services such as access to healthcare, to education, banking, social services, and documentation. And this is just to ensure that clients are able to realize their rights and access them as they are rightfully able to do so in terms of the Constitution of South Africa. We also offer legal representation, including urgent intervention in cases of arrest, detention, unlawful rejection of asylum claims, or denial of service. What we also do is to conduct advocacy, policy engagements, and strategic litigation to challenge the systematic violation and to ensure that South African migrants in South Africa are able to realize their rights and rightfully exercise them. So our work positions us in the front line of how law, policy, and xenophobia shape the daily lives of migrants. We might all be aware of what is currently happening and the atmosphere when it comes to migrants, especially in Gauteng and also in other provinces, that there's a lot of scapegoating, either, through political parties or even many other organizations and vigilante groups. So we are meeting at this moment where South Africa is undertaking an unprecedented overhaul of its migration governance framework, as already introduced by Teboho and the team. So we say so because of the white paper on citizenship, migration, and refugee protection, which was issued sometime in 2024. And we're also looking at the immigration Amendment Bill B8 of 2024, which represent a substantial shift in the management of migration. While the bill contains some positive steps, such as introducing mandatory judicial oversight in detention, there's still concerns about the implementation capacity and potential of increased detention. So we are working towards ensuring that when all this happens, the rights of migrants in South Africa are protected. And maybe just also to state that what we've heard is that the white paper might be coming back early next year, sometime next year. So we, as people joining this call, we need to all sharpen our swords to be ready for whatever it is that is going to come, to ensure that we fight for the rights of migrants, and also the migrants themselves also fight for themselves by ensuring that they make submissions to such policies when there's a call for for submissions. So the policy shifts that we are the policy shifts that we are seeing to date are honestly prohibiting migrants to realize their rights. So I'm going to touch a bit on access to healthcare and access to education. So in terms of access to healthcare, we've seen that migrants in Gauteng and other parts of the country have been turned away from hospitals. And we've seen that there are charges of discriminatory fees. There are some people are denied emergency health care, and sometimes documents are needed even when the laws and the policies do not allow. So what we've seen is that on the 25th of November 2025, Section 27 took the Minister of Health to court over the systematic exclusion of migrants from healthcare in the Gauteng facilities. We expect the judgment to come out soon, and we are hopeful that it will affirm the constitutional principles as the court did in the recent Kopanang Africa against xenophobia case. So as it was already said in that judgment that the exclusion of migrants from services, and also the exclusion of migrants from services, as well as policing of migrants by private persons, is prohibited and is unlawful. So we hope that the court, even in this case, the Section 27 case, will bring will bring a good outcome that protects the rights of migrants, because the South African Constitution does state that everyone has got the access to healthcare, and no one should be denied emergency healthcare services. And then when it comes to access to education, we've heard that there are threats of excluding undocumented learners in the beginning of 2026. And this is just to say to the people on the call that we need to sharpen our swords as well to ensure that when the year starts next year, children are able to access their rights. I know that, the Constitution says everyone has got the right to, but I think when it comes to kids, we have to all ensure that their rights are protected, because they don't know what is happening, and we have to ensure that they receive proper education and they are not excluded by vigilante groups or also policies that are trying to be trying to exclude them from accessing their rights, because they are rightfully entitled to education. So just to talk a bit on the significance of the CAC's judgment. During this case, the Kopanang against xenophobia case, where versus Operation Dudula, LHR was acting as amicus and representing the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. So the judgment was delivered by the Joburg High Court in November 2025. So this judgment is extremely important because the court has made two major points. One being that immigration enforcement belongs exclusively to the state, and that no private group may police migration. So this means that no other person is allowed to stop anyone and demand for their documentation. Only police officers are allowed to do so. And then the other important thing that was highlighted in this judgment was that harassment, intimidation, and discrimination against migrants is unlawful. So this judgment is very powerful and reminds us, or reaffirms the rights in terms of the Constitution, that not only just citizens have got the right to access, or to have got a right to dignity, right to life in South Africa, that everyone has got that right. It also reinforces the principle of legality, and that people should not, or especially vigilante groups, should not be opportunistic in ensuring that they lure votes by excluding migrants. So I'm just going to start to talk a bit on LHR strategy or LHR's role when it comes to protecting migrants. So I'm going to talk a bit about strategic litigation, direct support, and advocacy. So across all our clinics, what we aim to do is to challenge lawful detention and deportation. We represent asylum seekers whose claims are improperly rejected or delayed. We intervene where children are denied school. We help individuals in accessing healthcare and ensuring that, what we've also seen was the fact that children are denied access to immunization. So we want to ensure that children are also immunized to ensure that we also protect other people from spreading, diseases around, because if one cannot get medication for TB, for example, then it means that they will be able to spread the disease around. So we also assist in banking, employment, and basic access to services. So our strategic litigation has established key constitutional principles in the refugee law, and we remain committed to defending these gains in the face of new exclusionary pressures. So maybe in what we urge the government to ensure that migration reforms aligns with the Constitution. We also urge the government to ensure that migrants are protected and I have access to healthcare, and children are able to access schools, ensure that xenophobia is rejected. And we also urge the courts, whereby, we've seen good judgment come out of the courts, but we also urge them to ensure that they continue to protect the rights of asylum seekers and migrants in the country. So in closing, Lawyers for Human Rights remains committed to working with partners across the government and civil society to ensure that South Africa's migration system is fair, humane, and the Constitution is upheld and people are able to realize their rights. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And I will leave my email address with Deborah. So if anyone wants to get hold of Lawyers for Human Rights, feel free to send me an email, and I'll try to respond at my earliest convenience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cadel, for such a powerful and detailed presentation. I think your remarks have really brought into sharp focus the urgent and ongoing threats faced by migrants in South Africa, threats that are not only systemic but also deeply entrenched in the everyday experiences of exclusion from basic rights like healthcare, education, and legal protection. I think it's also a reminder about the possible return of the white paper next year. It's both sobering and it also rallies us to an important call. And so I think it is an important moment to just bring together affected communities and allies, and also to remain quite sharp and informed and to adequately prepare and respond decisively through advocacy efforts. Additionally, your insights into the Section 27 litigation and also the broader pattern of healthcare exclusion is especially important. And I think you can also see the trends in social media about the anti-migrant sentiment at healthcare institutions across South Africa. And so that denial of emergency care, documentation-based discrimination, and also unlawful fee structures are clear violations of constitutional protections. And it does speak to disturbing erosion of the principle that everyone, regardless of nationality or legal status, has the right to dignity and life. And so really commending that role that the LRH continues to play in strategic litigation, not only defending individual rights, but also shaping that constitutional jurisprudence, a difficult word, that benefits the broader communities. And so just also highlighting that recent victory in the Kopanang Africa against xenophobia case, it does stand as a milestone, as you highlighted, and it only reaffirms that only the state may enforce immigration law, and that's a crucial point in the fight against xenophobic vigilantism. And I think you've also seen programs on on TV as well, where you have this really broad vigilantism to just go and show up at people's place of work and random raids that aren't backed up by the state. And so it's really important that this litigation has come out. And so just also tying it to your emphasis on the rights of children, particularly in relation to education and immunization, is also quite timely. And as we look to 2026 and the worrying threats of school exclusion, we must hold that line. So again, thank you for your leadership and clarity and an unwavering commitment to migrant rights. So next we do have Mr. So I did quite a long feedback on that, so I'll keep the bio short. Next we have Mr. Mike Bonele Ndlovu, who's a human rights activist and media coordinator at Kopanang Africa Against Xenophobia. And so I think it would be quite welcome to also hear about that recent victory and the case that Carol has spoken to, and also providing us with some keen insights. So thank you. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Can you see me? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Greetings. My name is Mike Ndlovu, and I'm representing CAX today. And I'm a media organizer at CAX as well. So I will share the screen. I've just prepared, a presentation here. So let me share the screen just now. Okay. Right. Present. Okay. Okay. I just want to start by explaining what CAX is. So basically, CAX it stands for Kopanang Africa Against Xenophobia. And CAX is a broad coalition, of organizations, and activists, and community leaders and movements, that are committed to defending, the rights and the dignity, of all who live in South Africa, countering xenophobia, Afrophobia, and all forms of hate. We also do promote social cohesion, and constitutional values. We also do, monitoring of migration-related abuses, in communities, and also in government institutions as well, and we do speak out, against, policies, that undermine, the human rights, and so basically, today, I'm going to speak about, the rising and the hostility, the policy shifts and institutionalized, exclusion. I'm just going to first start, about the white paper. So I'm just going to highlight, the inconsistencies, that the white paper, has, in terms of, human rights and upholding, international law. The first one, it was, to withdraw South Africa, from the 1951 UN Refugee Convention, and this move, means, it would refuse to recognize, South Africa's legal obligations to protect refugees and abandon, a global agreed upon system of protection, and another thing is the systematic erosion, of the principle of non-refoulement. So basically, the policy, weakens the prohibition on returning people, to countries where they face persecution, and that's what we wrote, to the president. So basically, when the white paper was out, Kopanang made a petition, so of which, more than 100 human rights organizations, endorsed, the petition, and then we wrote to the president of the Republic of South Africa. So this is what was included on that particular petition. So yeah, and and also the migrant exclusion, or from essential services, like healthcare, is also part, of the white paper, and also the detention, and the shift, to border detention, camps, proposing, these mechanisms to detain more migrants, at borders, without, addressing, the judicial oversight, or the humane conditions, and also the politicization of migration and asylum, so basically, framing, migration primarily as a security, and a resource threat, I'm treating migrants basically, as criminals, as people, who come to basically, create instability in South Africa, And the second one, the Immigration Amendment Bill, B8, 2024. So basically, the bill, seeks to bring, South Africa's immigration detention regime, into compliance with the Constitution Court, So that's where this bill, is much, good than the white paper, So the immigration bill also, is nearly law, it is pending, presidential, assent only, and just a bit, of what is contained there, one of the things is the mandatory judicial oversight of immigration detention, so that policy requires, that detention, of irregular migrants beyond an initial period of 48 hours must be authorized by the court, and it's good because it ends, the practices of, indefinite, administrative detention, without a review, without being in front of a judge, and and another thing, the standardization, of arrest and detention, and a clear, uniform legal procedure, of how arrest and detention under the Immigration Act must be conducted, and it reduces the opportunities and the abusive, discriminatory enforcements by officials, So that's the nice thing, about it. So, okay. So I'm going to speak about the CAC's judgment, the landmark case. So basically, a brief background about the case. The case, was brought by Kopanang Africa Against Xenophobia, South African Informal Traders Forum, the Inner City Federation, and Abahlali basemjondolo, in 2023. And yeah, we took, Operation Dudula to court, alongside with the SAPS and the Department of Home Affairs. So basically we were sorting, relief, to the end, of private, policing, so the judgment was handed on the 4th of November 2025, as Carol did mention. So the judgment said that, the court, declared that only an immigration officer or a police officer has the power to demand identification documents, like a passport, to demonstrate the right, to be in South Africa. So basically, Operation Dudula is restrained, from demanding any private persons, their documents, And another thing was that, the protection of harassment and violence by Operation Tutula, intimidating, harassing, assaulting, individuals, who are foreign nationals, making public statements, that constitute, hate speech, which was presented by MMA, which was also acting as a friend of court, and interfering with access to healthcare, of schools, and harassing learners, teachers, and parents as well, and unlawfully evicting, people, informal traders also, from their stalls or where they do their business, So the judge also said, the immigration law, is clear, the court also provided, the interpretation, of Section 41 of the Immigration Act, confirming that the powers of the state officials to request identification are only confined to public spaces, and they do not authorize warrantless searches in private places like homes or workplaces. So basically, when the enforcement officials maybe are conducting a raid or a roadblock, it has to have a warrant basically from the judge. So it also requires, reasonable suspicion that a person is unlawful in South Africa. So and also doesn't permit, interrogation and arrest and detention of children under the age, of 18. And furthermore, the court also directed, the government of South Africa, to take reasonable steps, in the National Action Plan, to combat actually racism, and racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerances, including, the establishing, of the early warning and rapid response mechanisms, regarding to the threats of xenophobic hate speech, of which basically the government has abandoned that national action plan. So, what CAX, has been doing currently, I think Carol did mention it, about this case, and that we are represented by Section 27. So basically, Kopanang Africa Against Xenophobia, MSF, which is Doctors Without Borders and Treatment Action Campaign, we have taken, legal action, to compel the state again to stop the vigilante groups, from blocking access to healthcare. So the court case, was heard on the 25th of November at the High Court. So the application focused, on two facilities, that is Yuval Clinic and Rosettenville, and this clinic, has been a target by vigilantes, often linked to Operation Tutula, who unlawfully, screen, patients, and demand identification, and block migrants, and undocumented people, from receiving healthcare, and also we have to understand that, there are about, 6 to 7 million, local, people who are, undocumented as well. So that includes them as well, So the situation represents, a serious, public health risk and a violation of constitutional rights, and it impacts, migration, and asylum seekers, and the general public, who rely on uninterrupted healthcare. So basically, what we asked for for the court. It was, the immediate relief, on our part A, to ensure that it is safe, and there is unhindered access, to Uvel and Rosettenfeld clinic specifically, and also to remove all unauthorized individuals and vigilantes from the clinic premises, and to deploy trained security personnel at all clinic entry points, and to put public notices prohibiting unauthorized interference with access, and also to report all incidents to the SAPS and ensure the police support whenever, is needed. So I was also, part, and I attended, the case. So basically, what the representative, of the Department of Health, said was that, it actually blamed, the city of Joburg, because what we presented there, in the case was that, there is security on the clinics, and so basically, Operation Dudula are the ones that are operating, the gate, and they just stand there. And the Department of Health, said, no, it's not our fault. In fact, the security is contracted, to the city of Joburg. So that was their argument. So yeah, so Part B is going to be had, next year, and just um, to update you, is that the judgment has just been handed. While Carol was speaking, I did receive it. So um, I don't know whether I will share with, I think, Yeboho, so that at least maybe you could share, with the rest of the of the people maybe who need it, or maybe just upload it and just share it, on the comment session. So yeah, so part B is going to be held next year, and yeah, it seeks, a broader structural relief, to address, vigilantism, in Gauteng, healthcare, facilities, that includes, monitoring and accountability, and compliance, with the constitutional obligations, So yeah, so we did present, that vigilantes, have blocked health access, ARVs, child immunization, like Carol has said, pregnant women, infants, and people with chronic, conditions, and yeah, and also what we are also busy with is the statement petition. We launched on the 20th of August, and a petition that has been signed by more than 200 individuals and 130 over 130 organizations. So that is what we are busy now, and the petition is called the Vigilantism, Racial Profiling, and Hatred Towards African Descent Must Stop Now. We must never allow apartheid to return, in a different guise. So, we affirm actually, that Operation Dudula and March, and their supporters, they are breaking the law, when they block people, especially migrants, and people, who are, of African descent, and from accessing public health care, and these actions are also a violation of South Africa's constitution. So yeah, so that is what we are busy right now, and also what we have planned is a march, next year. I think it's going to happen early next year. We don't know the exact date, so we are mobilizing. We are doing, monthly webinars. So if people, would like, to join, the webinars or even join CACs, I will leave my email so that they can contact me, or else they can go to the website on the contact us, page. They can just, send, a message there, so that they can join CACs. To join CACs is very simple. As you know, CACs is more of a social movement. Anyone can join CACs. So it's that easy. And there's information of our website. If comrades maybe want to know more about CACs, but yeah, I'm more than happy, to brief them, if they would like, to join. Otherwise, I think my presentation ends here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for that clear and thoughtful presentation. The work being done by Kopanang Africa against xenophobia CACs is both inspiring and deeply necessary. I think the role that CACs is playing in building a broad-based coalition of community leaders, activists, and civil society really reflects a powerful commitment to defending the dignity and rights of all who live in South Africa. And those efforts to monitor migration-related abuses, speak out against harmful policies, and really attempting to build social cohesion are critical to ensuring that the responses to migration are grounded in constitutionalism and then also the protection of human rights. And so it's really encouraging to hear about the petition that mobilized over 100 organizations in response to the white paper. I think that kind of democratic engagement is critical. And so it really does give insight to the role that CACs has been playing for calling for inclusive dialogue and accountability, and also the important role civil society can play to ensure that we shape the future of migration policy. The detail that you provided on the CACs judgment was also especially powerful. This ruling is a landmark affirmation that the state may only enforce immigration law, and that harassments, raids without warrants, intimidation, and discrimination by private groupings are unlawful. And I think, weaving that also to the threats that civil society faces in response to advocating for migrant rights is also something that I think needs greater attention, especially given that we need to have that critical check on xenophobic vigilantism. And so I just really want to thank you again and the entire CACs network for the unwavering commitment. And so that work continues to set an example of how principled community-driven action does bring about long-lasting change. So definitely a big thank you. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Professor Joe Vieri, one of South Africa's foremost scholars on migration and health. Prof. Vieri is the director at the African Center for Migration and Society and an associate professor at the University of Witwatersrand. Her internationally recognized research explores how migration intersects with health, urban inequalities, and social justice. Her work places evidence on inclusion, constitutional values at the center of policy and public debate. She's both deeply involved in local and international policy processes, ensuring that the voices and experiences of migrants inform development of humane and effective responses. So we're really honored to have you with us, Prof. And so over to you.
Thanks so much, Fauziam, for such a generous introduction. And thanks to colleagues who've already spoken for the great work that you're involved in and continue to lead, but also for setting, the bleakness of the scene, I think, very well. And what I'm going to try and do in the next few minutes is talk a little bit about not simply around just the right to healthcare for foreign migrants in the country, but much more of a focus on where we're seeing policies, legislation, and government processes themselves contradicting themselves, and the kind of schizophrenia that we see within the political policy world in how the scapegoating of foreign migrants for various failures of the state continues to manifest. And one of the things that I want to flag here is that there is obviously a very established movement in the country, historically looking at the right to healthcare for all, as well as obviously a strong migrant rights movement, also looking at issues around access to healthcare. And we need to find ways to strengthen and forge stronger solidarity between the broader right to health sector and the migrant rights and refugee rights sector, because there is so much that can be done together. And I think that health is one of the issues that genuinely does negatively impact everyone if anyone is left behind in our health responses. So I'm drawing here on work that I've done with different colleagues over the years, but most recently a paper that I published with my colleague Becky Walker that really was looking at the current sort of context around policy and practice in the South African space when we look at health access, asylum seekers, refugees, and undocumented migrants. And I saw that SALO colleagues had used this in their initial invitation, and it's always reassuring when people outside of the dry academic space are finding the work that we write up helpful, because for us what's key is that it reaches different spaces, and this is something that we value, these sorts of opportunities to engage in. And importantly, what really, and it's what we know, right, but what we are seeing more and more clearly and more explicitly is that not only is South Africa as a country and therefore impacting the region and the continent failing to meet its goals and ambitions around universal healthcare coverage, so this is where the national health insurance comes in, it's actively retreating from them. And we're seeing that exclusionary practices, once informal, are now guiding policy processes very explicitly. And we have a long way to go if we're going to be working to ensure that healthcare is truly accessible, is truly acceptable and sustainable for all. And we need urgent policy, legal and institutional reforms to manage this. Without doing so, the most vulnerable, which includes many foreign nationals, will be excluded from essential services. And we know that this is about undermining the Constitution, but also broader global health targets and goals that we're all in support of. So there are 4 key areas that we really sort of were flagging in this. One is around the legal regression that others have already spoken to, and the focus on securitization of policy. So looking at securitized approaches to the management of the movement of people across borders. Policy by practice, where we're seeing policy becoming kind of institutionalized simply through things happening rather than through any policy being formally developed or implemented, which is leading to informal exclusion and administrative discretion. So those working at the front lines, whether you're a security guard outside a clinic, whether you're somebody responsible for opening files, whether you're a receptionist or a data clerk, you have actually a lot of power to determine who is being excluded administratively from the system. Legal liminality, so here we're talking about where people are left in limbo, waiting for outcomes on whether it's asylum seekers, whether it's people waiting for renewals, whether it's waiting to hear outcome of refugee status determination or an appeal. People are left in a liminal state. They're left in this limbo. And this has impacts that are beyond simply structural issues around accessing services, but they themselves have a negative health impact on individuals who are waiting, with broad mental health implications. And then finally, and I think very relevant to the conversation today, is that civil society is then rendered the safety net and stepping in and taking responsibility for what should be the responsibility of the state. And we know that this is unsustainable, but not only is it unsustainable, it's also wrong. It shouldn't be that civil society is stepping in to take care of the state's duties. So how do we bring these 4 challenges together? And they've already been spoken to this morning, and think through what's needed to move forward. One of the realities, and this is something that within our centre we've spoken about for a long time, is that whilst obviously rights-based advocacy is centre, nobody is disputing that, we know that a rights-based approach itself can't win the challenges that we're facing. When we're trying to address political and personal opinions, we know we get stuck into these very, very complicated and difficult exclusionary spaces. So there is a question about whether we need to think about what other arguments we can be using to try and support the state to see its responsibilities. And in this case, one of those would be around a public health argument, really trying to sort of send home the message that if we are limiting access to healthcare for some, it is going to have a negative impact on health of the whole population. And there's various ways that that happens, but particularly if we're thinking about, say, communicable diseases. If we look back at COVID, we saw that there was a moment where we did have a positive and productive public health approach to ensuring the inclusion of foreign nationals, included undocumented migrants, in the vaccination program. We knew that if not everybody can be vaccinated, then the vaccination for the few who are able to access it means nothing. We need a population level intervention. And I think there were really important lessons that were learned there, where the realities of what it means to have good public health and the need that this brings for a de facto inclusionary response was something positive. And can we learn from that? And can we go back to that? How can we think about taking some of the mobilization from that into where we sit today? I'm not going to go into huge detail because I think people are very familiar, but when we talk about the National Health Insurance in its current formulation, it is exclusionary. And it's actually showing contradictions to the Constitution, the National Health Act, and it's a regressive approach to access to healthcare. It explicitly denies access to basic healthcare for asylum seekers and undocumented migrants. And this was reviewed back in 21-22, when there was a whole review looking at the challenges and options that the Portfolio Committee on Health faced when they were reviewing the submissions to the NHI. And what was made very clear, and it's on the slide, but is that the exclusion of asylum seekers and migrants from NHI benefits was unconstitutional and, importantly, counterproductive. So the Bill of Rights applies to all people in our country, and we know that Section 27 of the Constitution allows for everyone to have the right to access healthcare, and clearly does not exclude people on the grounds of their status as asylum seekers. Now, the NHI places South Africa at risk of violating non-refoulement principles if asylum seekers are forced to leave because of failure to access healthcare. Importantly, they acknowledge that the health of the nation was influenced by the health of all within the country. So excluding any inhabitant of the country was counterproductive, and it would fuel the spread of disease and add to the burden of disease. And this is important when we think about, for example, if I have the right to access basic healthcare, but I'm afraid to, or if that right is taken away from me, then I'm not going to be accessing care at the primary healthcare level, where it might be about prevention or it might be about treatment of a condition. Rather, I'm going to be coming to the healthcare system through an emergency healthcare route, direct to a hospital when I'm very sick. So not only is that unfair and affects me as an individual, it also means there's a different burden placed on the healthcare system. So it's counterproductive also in the costs that ultimately are then incurred by the system through preventing people accessing care at early stages. And it was made very clear that it's essential to adopt a clear principle of non-discrimination in the application of the NHI and the inclusion of asylum seekers, undocumented migrants, students, and all children as beneficiaries. So this was made very, very clear in 2022. But these exclusionary practices we know still exist. In 2024, just after Dr. Motsoaledi returned as Minister of Health, moving from the Minister of Home Affairs, when he returned back to health, he was interviewed by Mia Milan at Bekasisa and was challenged about the fact that the NHI Act indicates that asylum seekers and undocumented people wouldn't have the right to access basic healthcare, which by definition includes prevention and treatment for HIV, as well as tuberculosis and other infectious diseases, but importantly around HIV. And he actually said in 24, if there's a mistake in the NHI Act about that, it needs to be corrected. If you refuse people with highly infectious diseases like HIV treatment, it's going to spread around. Then you're working in reverse, because otherwise, without offering treatment, I don't think we'd be able to defeat the disease. So we have this clear recognition from an outgoing Minister of Home Affairs returning to be Minister of Health, which he had been previously, recognizing clearly how nonsensical and schizophrenic these legislative suggestions are in terms of basic public health principles. So it's recognized, yet nothing has been done about it. I won't go through all of the content on these slides, but this is just to bring some voice to what we're seeing currently around challenges in accessing healthcare, but how we're seeing this has now been amplified through the actions of vigilante groups, as has been discussed by previous speakers. But we need to recognise that we will continue to see a number of women delaying antenatal care visits when they're pregnant. Maybe they're also living with HIV, but they're afraid to go to healthcare facilities because of mistreatment. The hospital's strict. I don't know if they're not documented, they can't access. They'll be restricted, but I don't actually know what happens further. And this is another challenge where we know that people working in the health system itself sort of say, well, they can't access, but we still don't really know what happens, but they mustn't access. And this is something that we are seeing where we've got clinics where Dudula and others are outside, that this is sometimes being supported by healthcare workers. And we need to better understand why it is that healthcare workers are willing to support Dudula and others, and what that means for better understanding the front line of the healthcare system. It's a public health program. You have people being turned away because they don't have official ID documents. It's ridiculous because lots of South Africans don't have the ID books. Now, this is another space where a broader public health argument becomes incredibly important, because it's not only non-citizens that are being impacted negatively, but also South Africans without ID books. And we've seen this more recently with the actions of Dudula. But where we become so obsessed over this idea of IDs and documents, and we look at some of the suggestions of how the National Health Insurance Act and associated changes in the health information system are being designed, issues around access to documentation becomes even more problematic. I don't expect you to read the slide, but the gist here is really about the fact that at the level of individual facilities, we sometimes see a particular policy or a particular process being put in place at a facility level that is contradictory to what is happening nationally, provincially, or even at the district level, for example. And when we're in situations such as that, what does this mean for how we try and uphold the law? How do we try and uphold things when you've got facility managers directly telling their staff to prevent certain individuals from accessing care, or that they must make certain payments or behave in certain ways? You'll all remember, and it was mentioned, I think, earlier, about the Section 27 judgment confirming that all pregnant and lactating women and children under 6 must be provided with free services at public hospitals. The fact that this had to go to court in itself is, I think, as we've seen with more recent cases, the fact that we're in the situation where these are the sorts of challenges that are having to be introduced at the level of the courts is indicative of just how broken the systems are, and how broken as a society we are to think that a child under 6 should not be able to access certain levels of care because of their status as an undocumented migrant, for example. I want to return to the current Minister of Health. 1st of December was World AIDS Day, and I've been looking back at something he'd said last year, so on the 1st of December last year, and he talked about the importance of a renewed commitment to addressing inequalities and ensuring equitable access to quality healthcare services. And this was with a particular focus on vulnerable and marginalised communities. And he spoke explicitly to migrants, and he spoke explicitly to the need to ensure that there is equality and fairness for everyone, regardless of gender, age, sexuality, ethnicity, religion, or HIV status, and called for this renewed commitment to ensure that we aren't leading to failing public health services, as these communities are already pushed away from vital health and social services. So again, the Minister recognising the importance of an inclusive response, but still not having addressed the inclusive needs that have already been outlined in the promises he'd already made. sorry. So this is from a wonderful information brochure that Section 27 put together in 2022. The link's down there, and it's a very easy to follow and incredibly helpful resource. And just a reminder that, you know, South Africa doesn't sit on its own when we think about healthcare and healthcare system responses. It has signed and ratified various international agreements, has regional responsibilities, but importantly has responsibilities to all within the country. And we need to recognize that these are the sorts of things that are contained currently in the National Health Policy Framework, that confusions around the NHI are creating even further confusions on the ground. So a reminder that everyone has the right to access free public primary healthcare services, and for higher levels of care. So often when you visit a hospital, for example, there is a uniform patient fee schedule, which then assesses people's income. And from that, there is a decision on the amount of co-payment that somebody must make. And this applies to citizens as well as non-citizens. And we need to ensure that this is not being misinterpreted even further. We have many cases where people are being incorrectly categorized and told that they must be fully fee-paying, for example. But now that we have the NHI bill that is talking about the exclusion of asylum seekers and undocumented migrants, whilst we're still running the patient fee schedule, for example, it's causing even more confusion, and providers have got even greater recourse for claiming that they were confused. And this is something we really must be addressing. So if we look at xenophobic discrimination, this is data from the XenoWatch program at ACMS over the last few years. We see that it was focused mostly around urban areas, particularly in Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town. And if we look over that same period at the most common discrimination incidences that were reported, whilst violence remains the most common discrimination incidents, health xenophobia, so being prevented from accessing care or facing challenges when accessing care, is also a key challenge. And this has been emphasised by work that XenoWatch has undertaken, looking at the period of February to November this year, and looking specifically at challenges faced by foreign nationals accessing healthcare. And you can see again that Gauteng is the locus of these challenges. Just a quick reminder that we all work across various domains that are linked to, for example, sustainable development and so on. But what's important is recognizing that in the conversations we're having currently, we're bringing together the global migration governance agenda, so the management of international migration, and thinking through the relevant compacts that exist around that, thinking about the sustainable development goals, and then the global health agenda. And actually all of these issues come together when we're thinking about various issues to do with the efficient, correct, respectful management of refugee and immigration systems. When we think about global health, what's important is to recognize that there is a lot on paper and a kind of very growing, very strong, committed movement globally around ensuring the right to quality healthcare for all, including for migrant and refugee groups. And this is something that South Africa has been part of these discussions, has been part of these dialogues, has been part of signing on to these various declarations. An important point is the World Health Organization and the current Global Action Plan, the GAP, on promoting the health of refugees and migrants. South Africa is part of this process, and in 2024 to 2025, the National Department of Health, in collaboration with WHO, undertook a national health system assessment to explore responsiveness to migration and displacement, and simultaneously undertook a national migration and health research agenda setting exercise. Now, the outcomes of these are due to be reported in the next month or so, and are another important hook for us to all make use of in terms of South Africa's making certain commitments globally and publicly around migration and health. And it's going to be important that we find ways to work with the department to utilize these commitments and utilize the promises that they've made through the system assessment and so forth to upholding certain actions. Something that has been interesting to see, and I think more work needs to go into this, and maybe working with colleagues specifically who are working in the field of the, migrant mine workers, is thinking about several processes that have sort of happened in the last year or so, looking around the Mine Health and Safety Amendment Bill, looking at a new, renewed and revitalized approach to looking at tuberculosis, as well as bringing in interventions to look at gender-based violence, safety and security for women in the mining sector. Now, obviously, all of these have implications for migrant mine workers, and I think it would be important for us to be following and looking and understanding what's happening in these sectors to see what that might mean for a broader response nationally. And then, just as I come to an end, in 2024, the department released an important document, which is a zero draft policy advisory, which was a discussion document prepared for the National Planning Commission looking at refugees, migration, health and development. In this document, the National Department is very clear. One of the most important steps in achieving South Africa's UHC, Universal Health Coverage, objectives is addressing health disparities for migrants and refugees. South Africa can create a healthcare system that is resilient, inclusive, and sensitive to the needs of all citizens, including migrants, by implementing policies that address workforce distribution, healthcare access, and resource allocation. Adopting these recommendations will increase South Africa's commitment to social justice and equity in healthcare, assist sustainable development, and be in line with national priorities. So hearing this directly from the Department of Health is something incredibly important. There is a recognition that by leaving certain groups behind, we're doing a disservice to everyone in the country. This is being launched next week, I believe. Collective Voices for Health Access have been doing a lot of work, including in partnership with LHR and CACS and others. And one of the outcomes of the work they've been involved in is production of a new an updated brochure information leaflet around access to healthcare in South Africa, which I think is something that is going to be very valuable for everyone. So I'm sure colleagues on the call are part of this as well, and this will be shared as soon as it is finalised. So I'm just going to finish there and just remind us of some of the words of our current Minister of Health. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof. Yeri, and for that really critical contribution. I think your intervention does remind us that access to healthcare is not only a legal requirement under the Constitution, but it's also a public health imperative, and really taking that nod to COVID-19 and also the HIV and AIDS pandemic and how it has broad implications on public health care, as you've indicated. The exclusions that you've laid out, both formal and informal, are not only unjust, but also really deeply counterproductive and undermining broader health outcomes for everyone in the country. And so the framing of health as a site where discriminatory policy, administrative discretion, and the legal limbo intersect is incredibly important. Additionally, your call to build a stronger solidarity between the migrant rights sector and then also the broader health movement. Health rights movement is timely and necessary, especially as we're heading into the NHI as well, and the implications of excluding migrants to healthcare as well. And so these are not just parallel struggles, as you've indicated, they're all deeply interconnected. So again, thank you for that continued leadership in ensuring that research informs not just policy, but also justice. So thank you very much. Next, I'd really like to introduce our final speaker, Mr. Bram Hanekom, a well-respected activist with a long track record in human rights advocacy, particularly in the area of migration and refugee protection. Bram is the founder of an immigrant rights NGO called PASOP and also holds a degree in disaster management, as well as a postgraduate diploma in humanitarian assistance from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. He's served in various leadership roles in civil society, including the boards of Witness Change, Cape Town TV, and the National Development Agency. Bram is known for his international advocacy, having spoken on South Africa's human rights landscape at various international institutions, And so we are really honored to have him with us today to close out this dialogue. Over to you, Bram.
No, thank you so much, colleagues. Apologies for not putting my camera on because I'm in transit. Firstly, it's wonderful to hear the analysis from Joe and from our colleagues who have been at the forefront of combating this revolting trend to try deny basic health care for the most vulnerable peoples that are in the Republic of South Africa. Um, I think in analyzing South Africa's direction when it comes to immigration policy, it may be important for one to reflect on the good and the bad of both the recently released migration policy paper of the Democratic Alliance, given that the Minister of Home Affairs, Leon, is a member of the Democratic Alliance and part of the unity government. It may also be important to reflect on the trends within the governing party that leads the GNU, and to see where there are points of contradiction and where there are points of agreement between the two party positions. It does seem that since the new minister took over, there have been some positive outcomes. I think that Joe and others would be equally happy to see that James Chapman and Mavuso Msimang are on the Immigration Advisory Board, a very positive development. I know that SALO has hosted Mavuso not long ago at the beginning of the year, in about April, to discuss the immigration policies, and his views are closer to the views that I think we harbor. It's important, I think, for us to reflect on those policy contradictions and those policy interventions. One of them being this immigration board. I think that it would be important for members of civil society to review, encourage, and support the Immigration Advisory Board and to try and engage them around policy positions, including the ongoing pressure to adopt a more right-wing, anti-immigrant and deportation regime, which I'm hopeful that the Immigration Board would be able to counterbalance when getting the views of progressive organizations that stand for human rights. Colleagues, we are in a complicated place as a country. The global trends are not positive when it comes to migration policy. The United States of America is a massive economy. It is quite largely isolated, but the maneuvering and the use of immigration and refugee and asylum matters to further political agendas that seem to be domestically focused and seem to be speaking to a very localized American audience that people might that Donald Trump might be concerned with, indicates the vulnerability of migration policy, even in the bigger economies and global landscape. We can't take for granted even the protections of refugees and asylum seekers. We are on a back foot globally, I believe, and there isn't enough progress towards affirming and protecting the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. And we're still quite far away from where we had previously, I think, seen the global trend going, which had been towards a consideration around the inclusion of victims of disaster, famine, drought, and humanitarian situations that lead to forced migration. Joe and others will recall that there were pushes and there was an element of engagement to try consider the inclusion of, let's say, environmental refugees into the global refugee definition, and that has not gone far. In fact, we've seen an utter reversal led and spearheaded by Donald Trump, where he's gone to international forums and blamed immigration for every problem, been derogatory around the mayor of London and other immigrant families that have even taken up political office in Western countries. So we're seeing a negative trend globally, and that negative trend globally, fortunately, thus far, has not yet found a local partner to connect with, but we need to watch out for that. With regard to access to medical care and basic human rights, the Constitution of South Africa remains an extremely important document that outlines the rights of any person that is in the country. And I think that fortunately, no matter what policy shifts and changes there may be, unless there's an amendment to the Constitution, it appears to me that the access to right and right to basics like basic education and health care are not likely to be taken away by a policy shift in the absence of a constitutional amendment. I stand to be corrected by Joe, but that's my understanding of the direction when it comes to the access to health care. Having said that, we need to be cautious as people who advocate for equality and human rights and the inclusion of all peoples in the basic rights of access to healthcare and education and so on. We've got to be careful to not make the matter distant from the majority of our people. I think Joe had done a great job at linking the fact that you can't have some people with TB, you can't have some people with HIV, and others who are not allowed the necessary medical interventions. Sorry, I think. Okay, there we go. You can't have some people not afforded those rights and expect that in the same community the spread of those diseases and the impact of those diseases won't affect the entire community. This trend of trying to garner popular support by being anti-immigrant will be tested in the local government elections, because I do understand that Tudula has registered as a political party. It'll be very interesting to see whether or not they do garner any support from the electorate. My sense is that they will do badly, and I think that will help a lot in terms of clarifying the electorate's view on these migration issues. Having said that, I think that there are other parties like the PA and Action SA that are likely to improve in their electoral support, and unfortunately their immigration policies are pretty terrible as well, and we'll see to what extent that influences the political landscape. We have a situation where in South Africa we are increasingly isolated on our progressive policies while we're fighting for improvement on the ground. The global shifts are rather negative, and we need to also look at how South Africa and organizations can influence and maneuver on continental positions. So we're not just isolated from Europe and the West, that some of those countries have gone towards the right and are much more anti-immigrant elected leaders. We also have a challenge on the continent where we still haven't seen a move away from encampment policies. We still haven't seen the accommodating of other African migrants in other African countries. So one might want to consider focusing also on a continental and African transformation of immigration policy to make it more progressive. Because right now it seems to me that South Africa is the only country on the continent that's meaningfully allowing the integration of asylum seekers and refugees into the economy. I'm not sure I stand to be corrected, but definitely we've become not just a destination, but we're becoming an increasingly lone voice that has this kind of progressive integrated policy that we're trying to protect and defend. Ultimately, South Africa has a history of migration from when the mine workers went on strike. The labor from Mozambique participated in holding the economy hostage to challenge the apartheid regime. We also have a history of liberation fights around the country in frontline states. We've got a history of liberation movement that among its founding members had chiefs and leaders from other countries, not only South Africa. And we obviously exist in a context where the borders were not defined by the African leaders themselves. So we are in a position where we should have a good narrative to promote around the need to include and to accommodate foreign nationals in our daily lives. But we also need to be mindful of the real challenges in our region and continent. It's not an acceptable situation that people need to go 2,000 kilometers in order to gain access to basic human rights and health care. There also needs to be, I think, some element of confronting the causal factors of migration. Some of them are positive migration, where people are coming to South Africa because of the successes of the economy and the rights that South Africa affords people. Others are negative because you literally find sometimes people needing to cross the border because in their country they might not be able to give birth at a hospital, they can't afford it, or the medical support is insufficient. So there's a forced migration that needs to be considered. And ultimately, I think we've said this before, that deportation clearly is not a clever use of state money, and it's not a sustainable solution. It was a bit disappointing to see that South Africa deported the 51,000 people recently, that actually equaled both France and Germany's combined numbers of deportation. Not something I think to be proud of at all as a country. And that money would probably go better, would be spent better on maybe providing some sort of support to healthcare facilities on the other side of our border through aid agencies or through some kind of agreement. And that would probably assist in the reduction of the causal factors. We know that from the years of our work in the space, Joe and others would attest that you'll have people who've been deported 12, 15 times. Nothing stops people from migrating when there's nothing for them in their own country to survive. So the causal factors are also something that I think need to somehow be integrated into the discussion. How does South Africa, on one hand, benefit immensely from a massive combined trade of export to the African continent? I mean, to give you an example, Mozambique is the fifth biggest export destination for South Africa. Now, we can't deny that South Africa is benefiting immensely from the economies of Africa. What are we doing as a country to alleviate the poverty and the health situation in the region and on the continent? And perhaps that's something that should be integrated in the discussions when engaging on good migration policy. It would be simplistic not to consider foreign policy and even foreign aid as considerations if one really does want to remove these causal factors that force migration. I maintain, and I think most of us maintain, that trying to deal with migration through deportation is essentially trying to deal with an illness by using painkillers without taking the correct medication that solve the actual problem. And migration is merely a simple symptom of either the success of one's economy that attracts people or the failures of other environments that have forced people to need to leave. So I think that in conclusion, I think that we need to consider looking at the policy positions of the political parties in the GNU, see how they'll impact the next few months and years ahead. We need to engage the Immigration Board to try influence them in their policy positions and to support them where they may need support. And ultimately also consider a method of engaging the causes of this forced migration. Because ultimately, when we look at healthcare, the price gouging around vaccines and the ridiculous amount South Africa was forced to pay to get access to vaccines is more of a significant and a more noble fight to take on than the unemployed or undocumented or poor person trying to get 1 or 2 doses of ARVs or of vaccines. So we must try bring focus back to the core issues: the excessive cost of pharmaceuticals, the failure of environments around South Africa to provide enough support for people not to be able to failure to provide enough support for people to be able to stay and live and work in their own environments. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bram, and for your reflections and also bringing a broader geopolitical and continental lens into this conversation. I think it's quite important what you've highlighted, that migration policy doesn't exist in a vacuum. And as you've noted, we are witnessing a global recession in refugee protection and migrant rights, with increasingly securitized and exclusionary narratives gaining traction, not only in the global north, as we've seen in the United States particularly, and in lots of parts of Europe as well, but also in parts of our own continent. And I think in that context, your emphasis on safeguarding the progressive foundations of South Africa's constitution is critical. I think it's also especially encouraging to hear you point out about recent positive shifts, such as the appointments to the Immigration Advisory Board, as well as the importance of constructive engagements with it. And so these developments does signal that civil society has both a role and an opportunity to play, not only to critique, but also meaningfully participate in shaping a more just and inclusive migrant policy. And so, finally, your call to also look to the rest of the continent is quite important. As you noted, South Africa does stand relatively alone in integrating asylum seekers into the economy, but this position must be both defended and expanded. And so, as you've indicated, there is an urgent need for regional leadership to push for more humane and harmonized and inclusive approaches to harmonize migration across Africa. So thank you so much, and thank you to all of our speakers for their really important contributions. I'll now be taking hands and going into the question and answer section of the dialogue. So if you would like to ask a question, please do come in. When you ask a question, please do state your name and surname and organization. I have a hand from Prince Abenge. Are there any other hands? Prince, please do come in the interim.
Thank you for the platform. I'm Prince Abenge, former Secretary General of African Diaspora Forum in South Africa. I worked as a migrant leader in South Africa for almost 14 years, but now I'm based home in Lubumbashi, maybe becoming a successful farmer. So I have a problem with not only South Africa, but many African countries. It looks like they don't have any mastery of immigration, and the many policies are anti-immigration, not pro-immigration. I can give the example of the UK, for example. In 2012, they made, I think, 7 million, or I don't know if I have the right figure. It has been a long time I read this document. They made a lot of money in migration, the management of migration. So in Africa, it seems that migrants are not welcome. There are extra people, surplus people in the society. Why is it that so? While I'm based in Lubumbashi, in Katanga now. I see the flow of foreigners in the mining industry. I see South Africans, I see Zimbabweans, I see some guys from West Africa, but they are contributing to the DRC economy. But the management, there is a lot of harassment of these people, especially illegal immigrant from India and China. They have a tough one with the Congolese immigration. So, but these people are contributing significantly into the extractive industry, but I don't see the Congolese government looking at that aspect of contribution to the economy. On the contrary, when they do a small mistake, they are deported back to China, to India. But why is that in the West? Western countries are making money, are integrating immigrant, be them refugees or on work visa, or I don't know what type of visa. So mine is not really a question. But yeah, it's a question with remarks as well. Why is that many African countries don't have a good mastery of immigration? and coming up with some positive policies, immigration policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that contribution. So I'll hand it to the speakers to answer. But before then, I think let me just call on Pat Horn to come in and ask his or her question. And if there are any other hands, please do come in, and then we can take 3 hands and go to the speakers for some responses. Thank you so much.
Hi, Chair. It's a her. This is Pat Horn. I'm from WIGO, Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, and former trade unionist. I'd also like to just put in some food for thought about how, you know, we as activists should be trying to deal with this issue. I appreciate very much the point made by the last speaker that a lot of this has to do with the way immigration is managed. I don't agree that African countries are necessarily worse, because I think, Prince, some of the European countries are absolutely horrendous at the same kind of practices that you are saying that you are noticing in Lubumbashi. So I think we've and the fact that we've been, you know, really trying to work on this issue. We've got this social movement of Kopanang Africa against xenophobia, and we've become rather dependent on litigation, and we've won most of our litigation, but it's still not doing the trick for us. And so I think you know, I'd like us to think about some of the things that Bram was raising. I think that firstly, we've all probably agreed, you know, on what the principles are, what's right and what's wrong. I think we probably now need to start moving beyond a very simple polarization between the good guys and the bad guys. And, you know, a lot of lamentation about that and about discrimination, which we all, you know is happening. The question is, you know, what to do about it. Even calling for ministers to be removed. We've even passed that stage. The minister that everybody wanted removed left, came back, and he's saying the right things, as Joe pointed out, you know, now that he's Minister of Health. So I think the worry, and already, you know, we're winning litigation. It's vindicating our human rights approaches. A lot of what's going on is being found to be unconstitutional, but we seem to be a bit helpless because we're dealing with people, you know, judgments are not being enforced. I think the worrying factor is what makes especially the working classes so attracted to xenophobic right populism. That's a generalization, but we who work with, say, informal traders, a lot of the working class communities, find it sort of quite disturbing the extent to which the communities we work with, who've been progressive communities fighting for socialism now, before fighting against apartheid, kind of buying some of the right-wing populist narrative that's coming out from these right-wing populist groupings. What's making it stick? Because I think we need to probably get through to that in order to be able to see what it is that we can do about it. Because you find people reluctantly in their organizations not wanting to say, but then in private saying, you know, actually, I agree with Dudula. And then they give you a long reason why they actually agree with Dudula. Anyone who that hasn't happened to, I'd like to suggest that you should probably need to be talking to more people, because, you know, most of us don't want to hear that, but it does come up. So the issue is, how can we target beyond, you know, what we've been doing so far? Because I think our organizations are saying the right things. We're getting the right results in the court cases. I think that we do need to give some consideration to, you know, what Bram said about the advisory board on immigration. How would we strategically be able to work with them? Because there are people there who I think would be pretty much on our side. one of the things that has struck me in the last couple of years, trying to just apply my mind to this, is one of the things that seems to be making working class communities feel really insecure is the fact that many of them are living at the mercy of gangs, organized crime, extortionists, and protection racketeers, which of course is not an immigration issue at all. And those kinds of activities, which are really, and then added to the lack of service delivery, which has come up on the question of access to health facilities and education facilities. And of course, we all know that the wrong thing is being done. The victims are being blamed instead of the government who's responsible for doing something about all of those issues. We all know that. We say that repeatedly. But this feeling of vulnerability and then the lack of action against it by the police, and we can all see with the way that the lid's been taken off what happens in the police, why there's so little resolve in the police to deal with this issue. But one of the big excuses that I've personally come across in trying to follow up some of these issues is the constant excuse by the police that we can't solve these crimes because there's too many people that are not documented. And because there's so many people that
Pat, sorry to interrupt. Can you kindly conclude?
Yes. Can you? I would like to just make my point. They say that there's too many people that are not documented. We don't have their fingerprints and so on, and therefore we can't get clues, and therefore cases get closed all the time. It seems to me that our minister, who's now a DA minister, is focusing on trying to be strict, but he's focusing on trying to get people in for the labor market that business needs. He's trying to cater for the needs of business. He's not paying much attention to the large number of undocumented people in the country, South African and non-South African. So I want to suggest that maybe we should think about putting a lot of pressure on this minister to do a mass documentation drive where every single person who doesn't have documentation needs to have their documentation. Both the South Africans who get denied all of their rights because they don't have documentation, as well as the asylum seekers who are not getting documentation because of the dysfunctionality of that system, as well as any economic migrants who might not have documentation, although most of them do have passports, so documentation is not their issue. So I wanted to just suggest that we try to look at strategies that as activists, beyond the litigation strategy, which is definitely on our side, how can we make that how can we all get together? Because we have many, many people in the country who are disgusted by what's happening. How can we have a counter strategy to the right-wing strategies that are grabbing all the headlines? Thanks, comrade. Sorry for taking a bit of time to get there.
Thank you, Pat. No, I'm sorry for interrupting you. I think the points that you made are incredibly important because I think we do need a strategy underpinning the work and to address these things in a coordinated way. So thank you for flagging that. Tebogo, I saw your hand was raised. Do you want to come in? And then if I may. If I may also point to some of my colleagues, if perhaps Mundrodzi want to come in, or any of my other colleagues to raise any questions, and then after which, Tebogo, I think if you have one more point, and then we can just go to the speakers to provide some responses. Thank you so much.
Sure, thanks. I'll try to keep it brief. I just want to pick the brains of the speakers. The speakers have addressed this before, but we can all see that there's a clear contradiction between South Africa's global advocacy efforts and its domestic policy. And I mean, it frequently positions itself as a defender of human rights within multilateral forums. Yet some of these recent developments reflect a more restrictive and, I guess, securitized posture towards migration and documentation. I know the speakers have touched on this apparent contradiction, but I'd like to hear how the speakers interpret this divergence. When you listen to leaders and politicians speak, human rights and, Ubuntu are espoused as core beliefs, yet on a governmental level, the opposite seems to be apparent. I guess I'd just like to know how this is so, and what does this reveal about the government's current orientation towards migration rights and protection? Is it a constitutional issue, or is it political electioneering? Is it really an issue of a lack of resources, or is it just scapegoatism? Is it a global trend, or is there more to it? Yeah, I'd be interested to know that. I mean, as we know, migrants contribute greatly to the informal economy. So, what is at play here? And then lastly, just to piggyback off Paton's question, how can we actually change societal sentiments towards migrants in the country, considering these tensions that exist on the ground, as exemplified by Operation Dudula and the like? Thanks.
Thanks, Tebogo. Can I please call on our speakers? Are there any speakers who would like to respond to some of those points raised? Bram, Profieri, Mike, and then I think that Cadel, our first speaker, has left us. Please do come in, speakers, if you have any sort of responses to the questions and comments raised. Otherwise, I might pick on you if you aren't going to come in. On my page, I can see Bram and Profieri. So can I call on either of you, or Mike, if you are still in the room? Oh, yes, I see Mike. Bram. Okay, you're unmuted. Please come in.
No problem. No, thanks, Fawzia. I think that the the issue of crime that's been raised has been an ongoing challenge. An ongoing challenge because politician after politician after politician talk about the rape, the murder, and drugs, and they blame it on foreign nationals, and they use it as a justification to say we need to deport these foreign nationals, we need to deny them documents, we need to deny them the right to be in the country, when it's just completely dishonest. Because just to remind some people in this platform, if somebody is arrested for rape or for drug dealing or for murder, they're not deported. They have to serve their sentence in South Africa in full before being deported. So when you look at deportation figures, these are not your criminals. These are people who are guilty or found to be guilty of not having correct documentation. And that merging that Pat mentioned of criminality and foreign nationals is a very dangerous one. In fact, I think foreign national representatives and organizations should also be at the forefront of demanding that the local drug dealer, regardless of their nationality, be arrested and detained, that the local crime syndicate be exposed and be held accountable. And in order for that to happen, it does require some collaboration between migrant communities and local communities, because in the end, it's one community that people live in. And I think it's extremely concerning how there isn't a mechanism to adequately address the incorrect narrative that's promoted over and over again by politician after politician, linking foreigners to crime and deportation and immigration reform to criminality. Finally, I think that the concept of documenting people is absolutely essential in that it's not incorrect that governments cannot plan if they don't know how many people are in, and that the boogie monster of 100 million immigrants or whatever fake trumped up number that people pull out, claiming that it's an accurate number with no material or scientific basis, is problematic, because it goes uncounted. Whereas when we've looked at the Zimbabwean documentation project, for example, we got an indication of the numbers. And overnight, after the Zimbabwean documentation project, people who were around at that time will attest that the number of people at the Asylum Seekers Center on the Zimbabwe Day completely reduced massively. So I think that the need to have people documented is a non-negotiable if we want to know how to plan for healthcare and also how to prevent criminality and so on. So documentation should be a focus, but that documentation should be done in a reasonable way that doesn't force people to come forward and be told that they are undocumented and they need to be deported, but rather provides mechanisms like the Lesotho Special Project and the Zimbabwean Special Project, which in of itself provided a mechanism including an amnesty for fake documents, and it did bring the country forward. Unfortunately, it didn't proceed to spread to other African nations. Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you, Bram. I think that's a really helpful response to the submissions made by Pat. Rafiri, Mike, do you want to also add any responses perhaps to what the first person raised, Mr. Prince, and then also Tebogo? Joe, I see you unmuted. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, thanks everyone. I think unfortunately, many of these are questions that we've been asking for a long time, and I think in a way the same tired answers exist, but we've got to, it's about trying to better understand how is it that an organization, if you want to use the word organization, and like Dudula, can be given the right to act as a political party. We need to better understand what is driving their ability to be so organized, their ability to have people out there all day, every day, who's paying whom, where's the money coming from. We need to understand these structures, and we need to understand much better why it is that society is allowing these sorts of groups to obtain such like kind of, the registration as a political party, for example. And I think that the entrenched, I don't know if entrenched is the right word, but the ways in which the state can continue to use the scapegoating of foreign nationals as an excuse again and again and again and again, until we figure out how to shift that and hold political parties to account, a lot of these other challenges aren't going to be resolved, because it is politically convenient to be claiming that, it's the foreign nationals who've done this, who've done that, this is why the health system doesn't work, etc., etc. And the point that I think it was Pat raised about, when we have got court orders and then they're not upheld. And so what does that mean? And we've got decades of legislation and, decades of, seeing where there've been orders against, whether it's the Department of Home Affairs, Department of Health, ministers, etc., and really important orders, made, but those aren't upheld, and there seems to be no ability to uphold those. And I think these are the kinds of issues around how the state functions that we've really got to get a better understanding on, because it's more than just trying to change sort of, opinions at the, at the grassroots level. That is all driven by this very clever political skimmering going on at the level of political parties. But I think everyone knows that. It's just more a frustration of not knowing how to sort of try and address that, I guess. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And then Mike, do you also just want to come in as well, and then we can just go to an idea, and then we'll, I think, head towards conclusion.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I just wanted, to agree with Pat Horn, what she just said, in terms of litigation, we are winning, but, in terms of, work that is on the ground, police acting, there is nothing, that the government is actually doing. And I think we as the civil society need to understand, the time that we are in, and I think we need to do away with the old ways, of how we used to organize things, for example, the civil society, the way it was effective, just, maybe in the apartheid era and now, it's very different, and we are not making that impact, and the problem is that, we as the civil society, we are not adapting, to changes, and so simple the answer, is I think it's found, in our petition, I think politicians do know the real truth, on what is happening, TESS SA has always, given out numbers, and whatever is happening, these people are well informed, but the problem is that they will do anything to keep themselves in power. I think we need to understand that, and that it gives us, the conclusion, of the power of social media and big tech. I think as the civil society, have undermined that. We have used the resources, in terms of doing, other things, workshops, and we have left, big tech and social media, and take, for example, Operation Tutula. They have no support whatsoever on the ground, you know. Actually, I've never met, someone who agrees, with Operation Tutula, I mean, speaking, of locals, but they seem to be dominating, social media and online, and that is where we as the civil society need to start dominating. Look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump lost, I think it was 2020, in the elections, but with the help of Elon Musk and X, he came back, and that's how, social media and big tech, is dangerous at, because, you know, all of these behaviors that we are doing online, and stuff, is being, analyzed, and algorithm, is just engineered. Anyone who is able, to pay more, will get, the rich, and yeah. So that is my opinion, So yeah, so yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And I think you highlight quite important points given the role that social media can play also, to fuel anti-migrant sentiments and really shift the discourse and public opinion around sentiments towards migrants. I see there are two more hands. So one from Anandi Sululu and then again Prince Abenge. Can I kindly ask you to keep it short, and then if we can have the participant, the speakers, just have short responses, and then in closing, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Tibogo to close us off. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Anadi Sululu, a former legislator in Zimbabwe and a founder of GISA, and currently leading a political movement called E-Movement. Hello. Yeah. Thank you for that interruption. Sorry about that. I would like to thank all the presenters and SALO in particular for this sterling work that you're doing in the social space. Yeah, it's very, very unfortunate that, especially Zimbabweans have been denied, or foreigners have been denied access to clinics and hospitals, some even leading to the death of some patients. I strongly believe that as Africans, we should be united. And especially in South Africa, there is Ubuntu, which we have had from a very long time, but is not being practiced properly. It's said that the politicians uses illegal immigrants as scapegoats. I think that have been said many times. And I believe that it's time that we need to take it head on with the politicians, have engagements with them. And, they are the ones who go on the ground and induce people to attack foreigners. So you've said a lot about the politicians, and I think we need just a direct engagement, invite them to such seminars, meetings, and then tell them the truth. And I want to go a little bit further and say, why is it that the SADC countries or heads of states, they don't want to discuss about this matter? It's high time that they should sit around the table and solve this issue of immigration, this issue of even xenophobia once and for all. It's very possible. to do that. So it's so sad that we, as human beings, we treat each other like that. I always admire sometimes the EU when it comes to issues of immigration. I'm not talking about immigration from those who are outside the European sphere, but within the Europeans, they came together and say, from each member state, there is free access. And that is something that should happen here in SADC. I don't want to talk about the borders, but surely we should come to some state where we agree that we are all one and take the issue of illegal immigrants, of calling each other bad names, of attacking one another. For the politicians, I know they use it as a scapegoat because they failed to deliver. If we can deliver as politicians, I don't see any reason why you should take immigration or illegal immigrants as as a scapegoat, as people who are causing problems. Yes, if we look at the health sector, South Africa is a rich country. We cannot deny that. That's why most of these illegal immigrants are coming and seeking medical assistance. And we know that the budget might be affected, but I don't think that whatever the foreigners are getting from the clinics or hospitals should adversely affect the operations of those institutions and adversely affect the budget. We have to look as well at what these illegal immigrants or foreigners are doing in South Africa. It's very, very unfortunate. I've never heard even from Dudula, saying something positive about what the foreigners or illegal immigrants are doing in South Africa. They are doing a massive job. They go to work even though it's illegal. They are taxed less. I mean, they are paid less. And for those who are taxed, they don't even claim those tax benefits, And in most communities, these people are united. They help the community. I look at the suburbs where these people stay, even the place where the foreigners stay. They pay rent to local South Africans. So they are contributing a lot. But unfortunately, not everyone is looking at that. So I would like to thank you, just to make it short, because I'll talk a lot. And thank you. I've read a lot of Paul, Sterling words from Bram or even Joe and everyone who contributed here. I think the honors is with the Minister of Home Affairs, the DA Minister of Home Affairs, and I would urge that us as the civil society or politicians, we engage and and solve these issues amicably. And there's something that I'm just trying to think. I wanted to say again about the immigration. I think I've forgotten it. I didn't write
Maybe
it down.
Anadi,
I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there.
thank you.
Let
Thank
me
you so
just
much.
leave it there.
If
All
it does
right.
come back to you, you're welcome to put it into the chat.
All
Thank you so
right.
much. Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Prince, do you also want to come in, and then if we can just have
Yes,
our speakers close us off?
let me be short. Let me be short. As a former migrant leader in South Africa, the narrative about migration or immigrant is quite dangerous because it is instilling hatred into the locals. Unfortunately, the one who just spoke before me, the legislator, has mentioned the aspect of the contribution of immigrant into the South African economy. This can apply also for any other African country. The SADC is the region that has failed the integration. I remember as a leader, a migrant leader, in September 2012, there was a meeting at Sun International Hotel of Home Affairs ministries from around the SADC region, and I think Justice Ministries. So they wanted to standardize the refugee status in the SADC region. But there are countries who resisted that project, So it is quite unfortunate that the integration in the SADC region has failed. But and the criminalization of migration has made some countries lose skills, lose money, because I remember after the spate of xenophobia in 2015, I think, it's not only the Black people who left South Africa, it's even people who were not Black who said, now after the African immigrant, it will be us. Let's be proactive. Let's leave South Africa. Let's put our money out of South Africa. There are a lot of funds that left South Africa to Australia, to New Zealand, to UK, to Canada or US. So we shouldn't paint all immigrants with the same brush. It's true. As I used to have meetings with the South African government, and I used to tell the authorities that if there is a migrant who commits a crime in South Africa, they have to be dealt with as a criminal. And if as leaders of the migrant community, if we come across a migrant who's doing funny things in South Africa, we can inform the police, because they are tarnishing the image of our migrant community. So the narrative about migration in many SADC countries like Botswana, Zimbabwe, South Africa, even in Lesotho, is not a positive one, regardless the contribution of these people to the economy. They talk about illegal immigrants. I know so many foreigners who were legal in South Africa, but who became illegal because when they go to renew their permit, or the system is down, and in the meantime, the permit is no longer valid, and they are unfortunately called illegal immigrants. So we should find some human way of dealing with immigration. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those contributions. Joe, Mike, Bram, do you want to come in with any responses?
No, just one final thing. I mean, while we're busy having fights between immigrants and local South Africans, innovation's overtaking. People are fighting over who can be the taxi drivers and the Uber drivers. Meanwhile, in the United States of America, more and more self-driving cars are being built and developed and being rolled out. A friend of mine sent me a video of her being driven around in one of these self-riding taxis. So I think that maybe we need to focus more on the global shifts that are going to affect employment, rather than allow for these conflicts among the poor that we seem to be consumed with, and need to try push for leaders to move to that kind of focus. Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you, Bram. Mike, I see you unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight this, this past G20, our comrade from KEX, who is called Nobuhle Viji, and Dumisani Nleya, took, a photo with Zandile Dabula of Operation Dudula, during the G20, And I did interview them, the KEX comrades, they said, these people, when they're off camera, they are just human, I think, we need to understand that, Operation Dudula, is a movement that is sponsored, those people, are at work, really, and they do know and they do understand, but unfortunately, they are just, the government is using them, to scapegoat, them, on real issues, like unemployment, which is 33%, and that thing, resonates, with the with the public, and then the public frustration, of of the problems, that are in South Africa. So yeah, food for thought. So yeah, that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Professor Veer, you want to come in?
Thanks. I mean, just to finally say, I think one of the things in this conversation I think has made it very clear is that we have to be careful to not see this as an issue that's only Department of Home Affairs or only Department of Health. We have to recognize that this is a cross-sector, cross-government, cross-society, challenge, and we've got to make sure that we don't continue just looking at, say, the Department of Home Affairs. Yes, huge challenges that they are responsible for resolving. But, if we're looking at where policing is failing, outside clinics, for example, and Dudula continuing to protest, etc., that's a failure in policing for everyone in the country. These are the sorts of ways we need to be looking at how we frame what we're seeing in these different contexts, so that it doesn't become seen as like, oh, issues around migration and xenophobia are only the responsibility of the Department of Home Affairs. Where is the work going on around, anti-racism, hate speech? Why is it that the South African Human Rights Commission is such a weak structure? Why is it that we're not having court orders upheld? These sorts, and I think these are the questions that we must not forget. And so, remaining focused only on, say, the Department of Home Affairs is a limitation, and that's something we should be cautious about. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I won't be taking any further hands. So if there are any comments, if you can kindly put it in the chat. I will now be handing over to my colleague Tebogo, who will be concluding for us. Thank you so much to everyone for letting me be your chair for today's session.
Thank you, Fauzia. Thank you to all our speakers as well for availing themselves at such short notice, and to our participants for contributing to this discussion. Your insights underline the urgency of ensuring that South Africa's policy environment reflects both constitutional commitments and the lived realities of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. And although these conversations often lead us with more questions than answers, they remain essential as the country navigates significant shifts in its immigration and documentation framework. As we close, it's also important to remember that South Africa's 16 Days of Activism campaign reminds us of the need to protect women and children from violence. Yet migrant women and children often face additional risks, including barriers to services and, in some cases, preventable harm, as reflected in the recent death of a Malawian child whose family struggled to access support. Addressing these intersecting vulnerabilities must form part of our collective reflection on policy, practice, and protection. This dialogue is one element of a broader set of activities that SALO is undertaking to promote rights-based, inclusive approaches to migration. We remain committed to creating spaces where these challenges can be examined constructively and where practical steps towards safeguarding all families, regardless of documentation status, can be identified and supported. Lastly, we'd especially like to thank the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for its continued support, which strengthens our ability to convene inclusive spaces that bring a wide range of stakeholders into conversation. We look forward to continuing this work with all of you and to building on the momentum created today. Please feel free to subscribe to our mailing lists to stay updated on our upcoming dialogues, and we hope to see you again. Please enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks to both.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.